Hello, everybody. Peter Maravellis here. Welcome to City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that follows in the footsteps of our in-store calendar during the time of the pandemic. We are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush peoples, also known as San Francisco, from where we continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love with readings, discussions, and forums moving towards the winter solstice and hopefully towards a COVID-free era. Today, we are delighted to welcome back to City Lights Hervé Le Tellier, celebrating his award-winning new novel titled The Anomaly, published by The Other Press. Mr. Le Tellier is no stranger to City Lights, and we worked together on an Oulipo workshop at the San Francisco Art Institute, sponsored by City Lights a number of years ago. Very, very fond memories of those times, and really a great pleasure to have him back with us again. Hervé Le Tellier is a writer, journalist, mathematician, food critic, and teacher. He has been a member of the Oulipo group since 1992 and one of the Papus of the famous France Culture radio show. He has published 15 books of stories, essays, and novels, including Enough About Love from Other Press, The Sextine Chapel by Dalkey Archive. He's also received a prestigious Goncourt Prize for The Anomaly. We're going to be posting links, actually. Check out the New York Times review of The Anomaly. It just got posted. Really wonderful. So he's going to be joined in conversation today by none other than Daniel Levin Becker. Daniel is also very near and dear to City Lights, as we've worked with him in the past and continue to do so. Daniel Levin Becker is the publisher, is an editor, a critic, translator, and member of the Oulipo Literary Collective. He is the author of the book Many Subtle Channels in Praise of Potential Literature from Harvard Press. Also the translator, among others, of Jorge Perec's La Boutique Obscure, and lately, Eduardo Berti's An Ideal Presence, as well as other titles. In 2018, McSweeney's published Daniel's book, All That Is Evident Is Suspect, Readings from the Oulipo, 1963 to 2018. City Lights actually going to be publishing Daniel's forthcoming book, What's Good? Notes on Rap and Language. In the past, Daniel has served as contributing editor to The Believer, also senior editor at McSweeney's. With his partner, Christina, he is the publisher of the newly anointed Fern Books. City Lights is going to be featuring an event on Monday, December the 13th at 2 p.m. for Eduardo Berti's book published by Fern. So Daniel makes his home in Paris. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you, we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of The Anomaly and other books by Mr. Le Tellier. We're also going to be hosting a Q&A at the end of this afternoon. So if you have any questions, comments, praise, what have you, please do post them in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard. So now, without much more ado, please join us in giving a warm welcome to Hervé Le Tellier and Daniel Levin Becker. Gentlemen, welcome back to City Lights.
Delighted to be back at City Lights, if only virtually. Hervé and Paul Fornell and I also share extremely fond memories of our Oulipo Fest in what might be the room depicted in your background. But we're coming to you from the cold, rainy Paris evening. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to be talking with Hervé about L'Anomaly. I don't have the hard copy of the English, which is why I'm not holding it up, but The Anomaly, just out from Other Press in Adriana Hunter's translation. It's a fantastic book. Obviously, you all know that, or else you wouldn't be here. And it's really taken France by storm, as well as a number of other countries, soon to include the US. So welcome, Hervé.
Merci. I will speak English, but I think merci is a good beginning.
It's an excellent beginning, auspicious even. So unless you want to give us a little preamble, we'll just kick things off with a reading.
Well, I thought that you could read the beginning of the first chapter, which is a black chapter. As you know, or as you will know at the end of this interview, the book is built on different type of genders, literary genders. So I decided, because this book was to be published in La Collection Blanche of Gallimard, the white collection, to begin as a provocation with a black book, which is a black novel. So mostly the book can be called a book of novels, a novel of short novels, and altogether every type of literary gender is used. So the beginning of the book is a black book with a killer. So maybe you could begin with this one.
Indeed, it is. It is very noir. So yeah, this will be the first genre, and this is the chapter about the character named Blake.
Blake.
It's not the killing. That's not the thing. Gotta watch, monitor, think a lot, and come the time, carve into the void. That's it. Carve into the void. Find a way to make the universe shrink, to make it shrink till it's condensed into the barrel of the gun or the point of the knife. That's all. Don't ask any questions. Don't be driven by anger. Choose the protocol and proceed methodically. Blake can do all that, and he's been doing it so long he can't remember when he started. Once you have it, the rest just falls into place. Blake built his life on other people's deaths. No moralizing, please. If anyone wants to talk ethics, he's happy to reply with statistics. Because, and Blake apologizes, when a health minister makes cuts in the budget, calling a scanner here, a doctor there, and an ICU bed somewhere else, the minister knows that he or she is appreciably shortening the lives of thousands of strangers. Responsible, but not answerable. We've all heard that tune. With Blake, it's the other way round. And anyway, he doesn't need to justify himself. He couldn't give a damn. Killing isn't a vocation. It's a leaning, a state of mind, if that makes more sense. Blake is 11 years old, and his name isn't Blake. He's in the Peugeot with his mother on a minor route near Bordeaux. They're not traveling especially fast. A dog crosses the road. The impact barely alters their course. His mother screams, brakes, too hard. The car zigzags, and the engine stalls. Stay in the car, honey. My God, you be sure to stay in the car. Blake doesn't do as he's told. He follows his mother. It's a gray collie. The collision has crushed its chest. Blood is oozing onto the tufts of grass by the roadside. But the dog isn't dead. It whimpers, sounding like a mewling baby. Blake's mother runs in every direction, panicking. She covers Blake's eyes with her hands, stammers incoherently. She wants to call an ambulance. But Mom, it's just a mutt. It's just a mutt. The collie sputters on the fissured asphalt. Its broken, twisted body contorts at a strange angle, racked with gradually diminishing twitches, dying right in front of Blake's eyes. And Blake watches inquisitively as the life drains out of the animal. It's over. The boy puts on a cursory show of sadness, well, what he imagines sadness is, to avoid disconcerting his mother, but he feels nothing. His mother stays by the little body, frozen to the spot. Blake's had enough. He pulls at her sleeve. Come on, Mom, there's no point staying here. He's dead. Let's go. I'm going to be late for the game. Killing is also about skill. Blake finds that he has all the requirements the day his Uncle Charles takes him hunting. 3 shots, 3 hairs, a kind of gift. He aims swiftly and accurately. He can adapt to the crummiest old rifles, the most misaligned shotguns. Girls drag him to fairgrounds. Hey, please, I want the giraffe, the elephant, the Game Boy. Yes, go on again. And Blake hands out soft toys and games consoles. He becomes the dread of shooting galleries before opting for a little more discretion. Blake also enjoys the things Uncle Charles teaches him, gutting deer and jointing rabbits. Let's be clear on this. He derives no pleasure from killing, from finishing off an injured animal. He's not depraved. No, what he likes is the specialized action, the fail-safe routine that gels with frequent repetition. So if that isn't an arresting opening to a novel, I don't know what is.
Yeah, the general idea was to show a character which would be not a central character, but an opening character, someone that everybody would remember and wait to see him come back inside the story, in the narration. And he doesn't come back very soon. You have to wait for a long time for him to come back. So as the first part of the book is built with 11 or 12 chapters, presenting a lot of characters, each of them has to be very dense. So the presentation of Blake as a killer, as a professional killer, was interesting because it's a kind of character which is something like a black string that you want to find again sometimes later. And the reader will have to wait, which interests me, because after that you have a presentation of Miesel, presentation of Joanna, presentation of many other characters, and each of them has to be strong enough to be an incitation to continue the book. I built the book, the first part of the book, as an homage to some American page turners, with the general idea to have at the end of each chapter something that we could call a cliffhanger, something that would push the reader to read further on, even if there were many characters. I think that for some of them, for some of the readers, they might have been too many, and even for my publisher. She said, "Are you sure you want to have so many characters?" I took the party to keep all of them. I eliminated 2 only, and I didn't suppress the chapters because I didn't even begin to write the chapters. So it was obvious for me that 7 individuals plus some others was enough. They were so different one from each other, but it was, for me, obvious that nobody would be lost. It's so different to have a killer, professional killer, and a young woman of 7, young girl of 7, and have a young black lawyer plus French writer, a bit depressive. All of them were so characterized that I had no fear of losing my reader.
Yeah, you've talked before about how you very consciously made them kind of archetypes as characters, and yet they're all extraordinarily richly drawn. They're very deep as characters.
For the first time, I made something which isn't the way you build a character. Usually you have the idea of a character and you throw him or her inside a situation. In this book, I made it the opposite way around. I've defined some situations, and for these situations, we'll have to explain which kind of situation, but it's the confrontation to yourself. For these type of confrontations to yourself, I decided that I will build the characters from the situation, from the reaction, which means that if you have a character who is going to kill himself, you have to build the characters who can do it. I wouldn't kill myself if I was confronted to myself coming back at home. I wouldn't decide to kill the guy who is me. I would negotiate. I would find a way to go through my life. But if I had this idea of having a killer, that would be so much easier. The killer has no, well, it's obviously for him, it's just another job. I mean, killing himself. And I wouldn't, for example, sacrifice myself. I wouldn't decide to say to the person who is in my flat, okay, keep everything, I'm going away. I wouldn't do that. I'm a negotiator. I would like to keep
You're
something.
a generous host, but not that generous.
Yeah, I don't mind about keeping the fridge, but you know, the persons I love, I would negotiate. And so I had to invent a situation in which the character cannot negotiate. He has to decide to sacrifice himself. And therefore, I built the character of Joanna, who is confronted to another her, another herself, who has an advantage, which is a Darwinist advantage, incredibly strong, which means that the other one is pregnant. And what can you do about the same you, but who is pregnant? You have to decide to do something that will not destroy the child, not destroy the couple, and you have to deconstruct your love for the person you love. And that was interesting too, because it's the only situation I could imagine where you can sacrifice yourself.
So before we go on, I should just take a step back for those of you who don't know the premise of the book. So we meet in the first section of the book, we meet all of these characters in their different elements, their different worlds. We get to know them and start to care about them. And there's, as you say, this series of cliffhangers that starts to build suspense. And then the central kind of event and you might even say thought experiment of the novel is that all of these characters are on a plane, an Air France flight from Paris to New York that takes off and arrives in March, right? And then 3 months later, in June, the same flight carrying the same people arrives in New York again. So so when you say people are confronted with their doubles, you're not speaking metaphorically. There's actually everybody who was on this plane is multiplied by 2. And most of the novel is these people taking their different approaches to figuring out how to deal with this completely unprecedented situation.
Yeah, I try to avoid metaphors. So in this case, it's not a metaphor at all. I mean, they are really confronted to themselves, but they are confronted to themselves with a difference, which is important, which is a difference of 106 days. And in these 106 days, many things happen. You can fall in love, you can separate yourself from someone, you can get sick, you can die. And all these situations built, of course, a strong difference between the characters, the one of June and the one of March. I thought the good idea was taking these two months, because March is in winter, well, part of it is in winter, and June is in summer. So the season that disappears, of course, is spring, and spring is a symbol of renewing, of
rebirth,
things, of rebirth, of things changing. And this disappearance of spring for all the people who reappear in June is, in this case, a metaphor of what can you do if everything has changed for someone else, but not for you. One of them has known success, one of them is dead. And all these situations were built from, of course, as I said in the beginning, trying to construct a book from situations and then build the characters. And the building of the characters was very interesting, because usually, because you have an idea of what your character will be at the beginning of writing a book, you throw him in situations all around the book. In my case, I was just trying to find what would be the best character to his clothes, his skin, his age, to endorse a situation, to incarnate a situation. And that was a very interesting part, because you have to choose ages, genders, social relationships, from this general idea that this person is going to be confronted to death, for example, or to sacrifice, or to killing. And then it comes so easier.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, you're telling us about, you knew the premise, and then you had all these characters that you wanted to react to it. Tell us about the genesis of the premise. Like, where did it start for you, thinking about this doubling and the novelistic potential of it?
In August 218, I had this general idea of a small novel of me coming at home and meeting myself and discussing about my books and what I have written, and not being very tender with myself. But at the end of it, I thought it's a good idea, the idea of a confrontation to a double. It's not a new idea. I mean, you can see it in mythology. In mythology, usually it's usurpation. It's Zeus trying to steal a human's wife, for example, like Amphitryon. And Mercury, his friend, his divine friend, takes the place of Sozi, who is the valet of Amphitryon. And it's very strange that we keep the idea of Sozi, and who is the valet, and not an Amphitryon, to define the double. The other idea is that your double can be an enemy. And this situation is known. It's Jekyll and Hyde. It's the double of Dostoevsky, and all these situations. The third situation is probably being confronted to a mirror of yourself. The mirror of yourself is the portrait of Dorian Gray, but there's many other situations in Cortázar. And the last one, which was the one which interested me, is really being confronted to yourself. And I had an idea which was close to a novel of Borges that you will find in a book which is, I think, the translation would be The Book of Sand, Le Livre de Sable, in which there is a novel which is called The Other. And in this novel, in The Other, you have an old man who could be Borges, and it probably is Borges, who is sitting in a bench near the Lac Léman, the Geneva Lake. And the other, he enters in a conversation with someone who is himself and who is 30 years younger, and who is sitting in a bench in a park in Buenos Aires. And they begin to speak to each other, no matter less of a distance in time, no matter less of a distance in geography. And they talk about what the past could have been, what the future could have been for each of them. And at the end, and this is a big difference between the book, The Anomaly, and the novel of Borges. In the novel of Borges, the old man says, there's a point that doesn't fit, which is the fact that if you speak with me now, I should remember having this meeting with you 30 years ago. And of course, this is a very funny idea by Borges to close his novel. But in my idea, the thing is that it was two different lines of time, two different arrows of the time. And there was no contradiction between meeting yourself because it was in a different arrow. So I had this idea of choosing all my characters to fit all the possibilities. I'm not exhaustive. 7 is not exhaustive. For example, I suppressed the idea of a young boy who's confronted to himself and to this sometimes stupid rebellion you have with your parents, and he sees it and he observes it and he decides that maybe there's another way to behave. So I suppressed him because the character was not so interesting, and I suppressed 3 of them like this. But all together, I had, for me, the best casting for my characters I could have. And I could explore many possibilities at the same time. The thing that I didn't do is make them interfere with each other. Because if you make the characters interfere with each other, the book doubles of size. And it becomes a so much bigger book. And I wanted to keep this distance where you take the book at 9 o'clock in the evening and you finish it at 3 in the morning, wondering what you have done with your night, and being angry or being happy, but not losing my reader for 6 hours or 5-6 hours, which was the general idea.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that, how you didn't want it to be a long book, even though it very, very clear, like it's so rich that you could spend much longer playing out the various consequences and implications. But it's hard to call a 300 some page novel tight, but it actually really is tight because there's so much more going on, and it feels like you do an excellent job sort of playing out the different potentialities of it, but without snuffing out all the questions, so to speak.
Yeah, well, of course, it would be very seducing to have one of the characters who is Slimboy, which I like a lot, who is this Nigerian homosexual musician, and to have it linked, for example, with Markle, to whom I imagined for a moment that he had a son who would get married to another man, and that Slimboy would understand that this is a possibility for him by only seeing how things can be so much easier somewhere else than in Nigeria. But I decided not to do it. Even if I was very seduced by the idea of mixing many characters all together, because what I wanted to do really is a novel of short novels, and I didn't want to lose this general idea of having this construction, which was a small cathedral, and I didn't want to build a city. Because, you know, if you begin to mix the characters, it makes streets around the cathedral, and you build another city, which is the house, for example, of Slimboy and Markle, the house of Miesel and Joanna, and I wanted to avoid that because it was leading too far. And as you said, I wanted to have a proposition, literary proposition, which would be an experiment of thought. Experiment of thought was for me a very interesting idea, because it's not science fiction. It is close to science fiction. I have nothing against science fiction. I think it's a very dignified genders with people like H.G. Wells, like, as I said,
Asimov and
yeah, well, there's so many good writers. But
Yeah.
the general idea was to have this happening now in our world. And so the word experiment of thought is so much better because it says, what if? What
Yeah.
if?
Right. It's not.
We were spoiling. What if we don't exist, for example?
Mhm.
What if this explanation, this only explanation there is for the fact that we could be duplicated, was an explication which challenges the nature of the real world and challenges the nature of our biology. Are we biologic? Are we electric? Are we really existing? Or do we just think we exist? And this idea was so strong that it didn't need to have something else.
Yeah. Shall we read another excerpt?
Yeah, please do.
I would like to just in passing say that I love your notion of a cathedral rather than a city. And it's a particularly powerful metaphor for somebody who says he tries to avoid metaphors. All right, so this is the beginning of chapter 2 about Victor Miesel. Victor Miesel isn't short on charm. His face, which was angular for a long time, has softened over the years, and his thick hair, Roman nose, and olive skin could be reminiscent of Kafka, a healthy Kafka who made it past 40. He's big and tall, but still slim, although the sedentary life inherent to his work has padded him out a little. Because Victor writes. Sadly, regardless of favorable critical responses to 2 novels, The Mountains Will Come to Find Us and Failures That Missed the Mark, despite a very Parisian literary prize, albeit the sort that doesn't cause a stampede when it's trumpeted with a sticker on the book, his sales have never gone beyond a few thousand copies. He's convinced himself that there's nothing less tragic, that disillusion is the opposite of failure. At 43, having spent 15 years writing, he views the small literary community as a farcical train where crooks without tickets ostentatiously take first-class seats with the complicity of incompetent conductors, while modest geniuses are left on the platform, and the latter are an endangered species to which Miesel does not claim to belong. Parentheses, devastating indictment of literary culture. Still, he's not embittered. With time, he's learned not to fret about it, accepting that he has to sit through book fairs, signing only 4 copies in as many hours. And when a comparable lack of success leaves whoever's sitting at the table next to him with time on his or her hands, they chat pleasantly. Miesel can come across as distant and aloof, yet in spite of everything, he has a reputation for his sense of humor. But surely any man worthy of being called amusing is always given this label, in spite of everything. Miesel makes a living through translation. From English, Russian, and Polish, the language his grandmother spoke to him when he was a child. He's translated Vladimir Odayevsky and Nikolai Leskov, 19th century authors whom no one much reads anymore. He's also ended up with some extraordinary commissions, such as, at the request of a festival, translating Waiting for Godot into Klingon, the language of Star Trek's cruel extraterrestrials. To put on a good front for his bank manager, Victor also translates entertaining English language bestsellers that reduce literature to the status of minor art for minors. This work has opened doors to reputable, if not powerful, publishers. Not that this has helped his own manuscripts cross any of their thresholds. Miesel has a pet superstition. In the pocket of his jeans, he always carries a Lego brick, the most commonplace sort, 2 by 4 studs in bright red. It comes from the outside wall of a fortified castle that he and his father were building in his childhood bedroom. Then there was the accident at work, and the model stayed by his bed, unfinished. The child often sat silently, studying the crenellations, the drawbridge, the little action figures, and the keep. Continuing the building process alone would have meant accepting death, just as dismantling the castle would have done. That was 34 years ago. Victor has lost the brick twice, and twice he's salvaged another identical one. Firstly, in a state of grief, then with no qualms. When his mother died last year, he slipped the brick into her coffin and immediately replaced it. This little red parallelepiped isn't his father, just a memory of a memory, a standard raised to his line of descent and loyalty. Another.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The it's interesting to see how these two chapters, which follow each other, are not written the same way at all. And the difference is slight. It's what we could say a slight disruption of style. It's not very experimental in the way that if I wanted to, I could have written a black chapter, much blacker, with much close to Chandler, much close to James Hadley Chase, much close to writers I love. But the rupture between these two chapters would have too strong. And I didn't want to make it too experimental. I wanted to keep a style which, if you don't pay too much attention, it looks to be the same writer who made the two chapters. And as we will see in the last bit, you will have to read, my poor Daniel. It's another way of writing again, but not very far away from the two others. I wanted to have a slight experimental book, but not too experimental, not to lose the reader. My main purpose was to keep the reader from the beginning to the end without ruptures. So I love the general idea that if you decide to read each character alone and decide to read history of Michael, history of Joanna, history of Blake, you will see the differences much more than reading the whole book as a whole. This idea was also it was an answer for me to a book I love, which is a book of Italo Calvino, which is If a Winter's Night a Traveler,
If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, yeah.
If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, which is a book in which Calvino begins nearly a dozen of different books and closes them without finishing them, and which is very deceptive for the reader. It's a provocation. It's a book about the books and about the deception of closing a book without with losing your characters. I didn't want that. I wanted to compose a book in which you wouldn't be deceived by the disparition of each character. You are deceived by the disparition at the end of a book, but not at the page 12 or at the page 15 or at the page 25, like in Calvino's book, which is a wonderful book and a real one, probably the most beautiful book about literature, but which is based on something that we always forget when we are going inside this courage assertion that it's a willing suspension of disbelief. And if we suspend our disbelief and suddenly the book is destroyed, this is so deceiving. So I didn't want that.
It's a rupture. It's disappointing, and it's.
I didn't want any ruptures, and I did want to follow the general idea of Calvino's book, but which is itself inspired by Raymond Queneau's exercise de style. But obviously, Italo Calvino loved, even if it is translated not by Italo Calvino, but by Umberto Eco. But it's a book he loved, and he often refers to this book as the general idea to write If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. So I wanted to keep this general idea of many different books, but keeping the experimentality a bit far away.
That's a wonderful, I hadn't thought about that parallel, but Calvino's book is so much about, you read the first chapter and then the chapter ends. And then there's this narrative between the chapters that talks about you, the reader, and your frustration and your disappointment. And so the first chapter ends and you go back to the bookstore and you say, you've sold me a defective book, and they give you another book, and then you turn the page and it's chapter 2, but it's not the continuation of the first chapter. It's a new first chapter. And the book continues like that for many cycles. And I love thinking about this as sort of a response to that, trying to basically anticipate that sense of disruption and make it a smoother, less ruptured experience for the reader, but also make space for these different kinds of stories, these different sort of as you were saying, these different literary genres and also the slightly different voices that you tell them in.
Yeah, the slightly
So,
different voices. And it was also an experiment for me to try to use as much as I could what we call le style indirect libre. How would you say?
free indirect style or discourse.
Free indirect style, which has been brought to a level of perfection by writers like Faulkner or by Roth, for example. And I wanted to explore this possibility of having the reader going inside the psyche of psyche of all my characters, including secondary characters for a while. And this possibility opened for me the different types of narration that I wouldn't have the opportunity to go inside. For example, I wanted to speak about the war and to have a soldier explaining his war and how he lived it. And for 1 page and 1.5 pages, I could write an episode in which there was a killing and in which there was a very strong war scene. And this was made possible by the free indirect style. And on a technical point of view, I discovered that the difficulty is not going into the free and direct style. This is very easy. It's going out of it. It's to show the reader that it's finished. You are not with this character anymore. You go back to the narration. And I make this a lot of times, and it was fun because it gave me the possibility to explore even more genders than there are genders in the chapters. Sometimes in a chapter, you have 2 or 3 genders that appear, a song, a poem, a male. So this was a real challenge for me to try to put in this book as many genders as possible, even if there were characters that were supposed to incarnate these styles. Sometimes I get out of it and I propose something else inside the chapter. And that was very literally interesting for me. It was something I had never done before.
So I wanted to ask you, I know that you are currently working on a television adaptation of the novel, that you're working with some other people. Can you tell us about what that experience has been? Because you, as you were saying, you have all of these sort of, all of this interiority that's freely but indirectly narrated. And what the process of not only structurally taking these different characters and the way their lives do and don't intersect, but also the way that you can take these stories and about their past, about their perceptions of the world, and how you turn that into, you know, whether it's a monologue, whether it's a visual sequence. What's that process been like?
Well, the general idea is that a book is a book and a series is a series. And if you wanted to do a series following the book, it wouldn't work at all. I mean, you can't have an episode talking about Blake and a second episode talking about Joanna and so on. So you have to mix them all together. And what we did is destroy what we are doing. And what I find fascinating is destroying the book, keeping the general idea of the simulation, keeping the general idea of the characters. The characters are interesting enough to keep them, but we knit them together. We try to make them interactive. And we are developing 2 things that we didn't think about before, that are in the book, but I didn't have time to develop. First, it's the Chinese. And the Chinese, which are in the book, are so much more interesting now after the COVID crisis. Because we discovered a lot about the function of China after the COVID crisis, about hiding, about not telling everything to everybody. And there is in the book the idea of another plane, which is a Chinese plane. And we are developing this Chinese plane a lot, which is interesting because it makes 3 feet. It makes the Chinese foot, the French foot, and the American foot. It's 3 societies which are very different one from each other, and it's a possibility to tell different stories. The second thing, as I said, is developing the knitting between the characters. and having friendships, which we give birth in the writing of a scenario, which we didn't try. I didn't try to do it inside the book because as I said, it would have led me to a longer book. But having Markle becoming a friend of Slimboy is very interesting. And as Markle is dying again and again, and having this friendship with this man is very interesting on many points of view. Plus, we introduce something which is also new, and which is I don't like metaphors, but it is a metaphor. It's the fact that one of the resources of the book is the metaverse. There is going to be in a few years the new universe, probably made by Facebook, but probably also made by the Chinese, about a place where you can go and it's a virtual you. And of course, having a virtual you in a virtual world is une vision en abîme. And we are introducing this inside the book, inside the series. And this is something I didn't think about when I wrote the book. And now it's obvious that it's a new dimension, which is very interesting to explore, because we have so much more time. I mean, it's 10 episodes. It's very long, and it's a possibility to go inside places we didn't expect we would go in a book.
Yeah, well, it feels like
someone is interesting, especially because we have, as writers, as you know, we are very solitary, and working with someone and willingly destroying your own book is a very interesting experiment, and I love doing it.
It'll be interesting to see how that manifests in your next novel.
Yeah, well, probably it will have some consequences. Yes.
So I'm just going to mention again that there are links to Hervé's books in the chat for those of you who haven't seen them. Shall I read the last excerpt?
Yes.
Because you were talking about Markle dying and dying again. So let's meet him. So this is the beginning. Sorry?
Maybe just probably the ficus, because it's a metaphor. The ficus is a metaphor again of Markle. So maybe just this paragraph.
Just the ficus paragraph?
Yeah, maybe.
It's a great paragraph. It's got fantastic opening sentence. The ficus is thirsty. Its brown leaves are so dry they're curling up. Some branches are already dead. Standing there in its plastic pot, it's the very incarnation of hopelessness, if indeed the word incarnation can be applied to a green plant. If someone doesn't water it soon, David thinks, it's going to die. In all logic, it must be possible to find a point of no return on the continuous thread of time, an irretrievable tipping point after which nothing and no one could save the ficus. At 5:35 on Thursday afternoon, someone waters it and it survives. At 5:36 on Thursday afternoon, anyone in the world could show up with a bottle of water and it would be, no, babe, sweet of you, 30 seconds ago. I can't be sure, maybe, but now, what are you thinking? The only cell that could have set the whole thing going again, the final viable eukaryote that could have rallied its neighbors. Come on, guys, let's see some motivation. Let's have a reaction. Fill yourselves up with water. Don't let yourselves go. Well, the last of the last has just left us, so you're here too late with your pathetic little bottle. Ciao, ciao. Yes, somewhere on the thread of time.
Yeah, I like this passage, and it's also interesting because it shows something of translation. Because in the French book, cell is feminine, and of course, it's neutral in English. So for me, it was a group. It was a team of feminine volleyball team, you know, and it was come on girls and not come on guys. It's a slightly different notion. It's interesting how it moves from one language to the other one, and I don't know what I prefer. But it's an interesting thing that sometimes the feminine dimension of the cell in French, une cellule, which is feminine, leads you to another image, slightly different. And this always happens in translations. but it's always interesting to hear it. And I forgot it was "Come on, guys" instead of "Come on, girls."
Right, and if Adriana had made it "Come on, girls," that would have raised more questions. That would have sort of taken the reader out of
yeah,
the.
of course. It's
of
logic when she says that. It's not. It's just that in French, it's impossible to say "Come on, guys" for sales. That's all.
So that's a great segue into another topic that I wanted to bring up. So this book has now been translated into how many languages? Like 30?
Oh, wow. There was a symbolic number, which is 42, but it's over now.
Yeah. 42 is a number that looms large in this novel.
Yeah.
But in any case, a few dozen languages at least. And it's, you've been traveling the world, picking up prizes and doing readings and amassing these new translations. So I'm curious, what have some of the surprises been, both about working with translators on this book and the, some of the language challenges, some of the wordplay, and also maybe some cultural things about like what would have to be explained to an English-speaking reader that wouldn't to a French or to, a Turkish reader or a Mongolian reader.
From the beginning of the publishing of the book, in French, we had already something like 12 translations, which was my usual publishers, like in Germany, like in La Nobilité Zéro in Italy and so on, and other press in America. So we began to work all together because usually, it's hard to for a translator to reinvent the wheel. I mean, sometimes when you reach to a certain point where it's a difficulty for a translator, it has already been a difficulty for another translator. So we built an internet document for every translator that they could all go on, which was my document, and everybody would say, this is right, this is wrong, how do you translate this? And the funny thing is that the translator is the best reader you can ever have. So sometimes they noticed mistakes that I made and I had to change the book. And the more the book was translated, the more mistakes I had made were appearing. And the French book was changing at the same time because we went from reprints to reprints. And in every reprint, I changed something that a translator had seen. Sometimes not very decisive things like what is the slogan of the U.S. Air Force, and I thought it was I don't remember what I thought, but it was Mors Abalto and not what I thought. And this changed, and altogether, the interesting thing is that there are, of course, many cultural differences between each world of translation, but altogether the book seems to be rather international. It seems to work a bit everywhere, which is funny. Today I was in Moscow, sitting in my same desk, but I was having a Zoom with the people of Corpus Books, which is my Russian editor, and it's very interesting to see that the questions are at the same very different and at the same very close to the questioning that we have everywhere.
Yeah, I remember you did a wonderful event maybe last year. I don't remember when it was, but it was you and I think 12 of your translators.
9 translators at La Maison de la Poésie, including Pablo Martin Sanchez, which is a member of Oulipo, and who translated the book in Spanish. And
Adriana, who translated it in English.
We had a long beginning of how to translate just the first sentence.
Just the first sentence, yeah.
The first sentence is so hard to translate. In French, it's very easy. It's tuer quelqu'un, ça compte pour rien. Killing someone counts for nothing. But it's not the way that Adriana Hunter had translated it. She has translated it in some other way. I don't remember exactly.
Translated it as, it's not the killing, that's not the thing.
It's not the killing, that's not the thing. It's good because it gives what we have in French, which is the rhythm we have in tuer quelqu'un, ça compte pour rien. But in French, tuer quelqu'un, ça compte pour rien, it's 4 syllables, twice 4 syllables. It's hard to have this twice, and it's finishing at the same time by the same syllable. The un, which is nasal, which is very a nasal sound, very French. Who says in other languages? Nobody does. And it's a flat end of sentence, and it's very vulgar. And in French, it gives the idea of a black book because there's something missing if you look at it on the literary point of view. And what is missing is ne. Because in French, you would say, not tuer quelqu'un, ça compte pour rien, but tuer quelqu'un, ça ne compte pour rien. So giving the idea that there is no ne tells you that you are in an oral book. So in a fiction book of a black world. And for every paragraph, there's such a situation which is difficult to translate. And of course, writers should not care about what the difficulty will be for the translator, because every translator is a writer, so he will manage. And if you think to make it easier for the writer, it's a wrong idea. You never must think to make it easier. You must think to make it.
You must think to make it harder.
Yeah. Never mind if it's harder.
Yeah.
Especially from the end of the book. The end of the book is impossible to translate.
Yeah, well, we can get to that in a second. But so this event is, you hear Adriana talking about what her approach was. So, tuer quelqu'un, ça compte pour rien. It's not the killing, that's not the thing. So same sort of balance of number of syllables, same ending sound.
Translation.
And then you hear 10 or so other translators talk about what they did in their own language that they were translating into, which is just such a special opportunity for a commentary on translation.
And interesting, we spent 1 week all together working on the translation of a book, and it was a very interesting week because some of them had already finished the book and it was already printed, and the others were still working on it. And the one who had already a printed book was wondering, oh, maybe I could have done something else.
Yeah,
the kind of situation where you say, oh, well, this was better. Never mind.
Well, that's the nice thing about multiple reprintings.
Of course.
So let's do another question or two, and then we can open it up to thoughts from the audience. One question. So you were talking a minute ago about the metaverse, which is this very kind of progressive philosophical notion that, and as you were talking about it, and you're talking about Facebook, which is just in certain administrative capacities changed its name to Meta.
Yeah.
It feels like this is a book that sits in a very particular way within the zeitgeist that we are currently occupying, and it comments on it and kind of belongs to it. But how do you think this book is going to age?
Oh, well, I don't know. It is going to age. It's the destiny of books to age. Plus, the place in this book of what we call pop culture is very strong. So it's a book really of 2021. There is Macron, there is Ed Sheeran, there is Elton John, and there is Maywen. I mean, every name dropping that I'm doing is showing that the book is it had to be realistic to counter the effect of the anomaly and of the proposition of thought which was given. So the effect of reality, which was in the namings of situations of geography, was made to counter this to counterbalance this thing. So the book is going to age. That's okay with me. I think it's the destiny of books to age. Doesn't matter so much. The thing which is interesting for me is that nothing was very new in this book. For example, the idea of a simulation is a 20-year-old idea. I don't think it has ever been used in this way in a book, or maybe it has been, but I haven't read the book. But it was the first time that the idea of Bostrom was used to make a parallel between our world and what a novel is. And that was the interesting thing for me. It was trying to have a strong parallel about what literature is and what simulation is. And the fact that we may all be characters in a virtual world is a very interesting point of view, even if, of course, there was an article in Scientific American, it was 2 months ago, and it said that there was a 47% chance that we would all be simulated. And I was so happy that it was 47 and not 51. It's a big difference.
Yeah.
Well, it changes everything. I mean,
right.
The kind of thing with
majority stake.
Yeah. So, the book will age. It's the destiny of books. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a point which is interesting. In France, the readers have read it like some things to come.
Mm.
They read it in 2020, and the book was in 2021. So they could think it's in the future.
Right.
And now,
right.
in the States, when you read it, it's a book in a world which has already been lived. So
Mm-hmm.
when you read the book, you have a different point of view about this. And it's interesting for me. I think if I had thought about it, really, I would have written the book in French in 2020, which means that experiment that you have now in America is the same that the reader would have had in France in 2020, thinking at the end of the book, well, this is strange. This is something that has happened, but I have no knowledge of it.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why? And this would have opened the mind to the idea that, well, maybe the simulation has rebooted and brought it to another world, which is the one we are living it, which is, of course, a proposition of the end of the book in French. But it's in 1 year. It's different. Reading it now today is even nothing better for an American reader, if I think about it.
Right, which goes back to the point you were making about sort of this difference between science fiction or speculative fiction and a novel that is more of a thought experiment.
Yeah. And this is why if like I did, I put the book in 2021, it's a slight twist towards science fiction. Slight twist. If I had put it in 2020, it would have been a more conscious decision to put the book as a real thought experiment. Look what has happened, and you have no idea it happened. And the reason why it happened is contained in the last page. And read the last page in another way. And of course, I have a small regret, but it's okay. Don't mind.
Something you were saying a minute ago is a good segue into a question that we have in the chat from Amanda, who says, I find it so amazing that you've created this genre-bending book that gets full-page coverage in the New York Times, and yet it's a story that hinges upon one of the nerdiest callbacks in pop culture history, Life, the Universe and Everything, 42. Did you conceive this story around that geeky heart from the start, or did you insert it into the literary story for the pure fun of it? Did you consciously set out to break down the barriers of what is considered respectable when it comes to genre in literary fiction?
No, it was conscious. I mean, from the beginning, I had this idea that I would put as much as I could of pop culture. I even had the idea, which I finally suppressed, to put a QR code and to allow the reader to listen to some music or to see some photographs, or to have something which would
a multimedia dimension.
Yeah, a multimedia dimension, but would be dated at the same time. I put an article from the New York Times inside, and all this general idea to bring inside the book many things which are from the pop culture was very conscious, very, very conscious.
I'll just show you. This is the article from the New York Times, which I can say with great pride. The article is written by one Pablo Levin Becker. The brother I didn't know I had.
Pablo Levin Becker, but the picture is made by
Eduardo Monk, right?
No, the picture is the article is written by Pablo Martin Becker, but the picture is.
Oh, you're right. It's Daniel Martin Sanchez.
Yeah, Daniel Martin Sanchez. So altogether, you are in it.
Yeah.
And the other
one. So it's funny you should bring up the QR codes, because a friend of ours, Eduardo Berti, who's also a member of the ULIPO, just published a book, a very short book, about a trip that he took to Romania to try to find traces of his father's childhood. And the book is filled with QR codes, which he has some interesting things to say about how he doesn't like books that sort of take you too far out of the rhythm of the reading, but he also wanted to share the sort of intimate moments of the trip that he took. And that seemed like another very interesting way to both date the book to make it a thing of its time and kind of spread out its temporal limitations. So because we're talking about Eduardo, I'm going to a question from Julie, which I think was probably inevitable that somebody asked: how did you use ULIPO techniques to write this novel?
Yeah, well, there is what is called un cahier des charges. How do you say cahier des charges?
A blueprint, a set of instructions.
Yeah, there is a set of instructions. Mainly, there are three rules which are used inside. The first, we talked about it, it's obvious, is many genders, many literary genders. The second one, which is also obvious, is the thing that it's a novel of novels, which means that I used my characters like strings: black string for Blake, blue string for André, pink string for Adrian and Meredith. And so I used them, making some kind of tresse.
You're weaving them together.
Yeah, and of course I have somewhere on my computer the scheme of all these strings tied up together. For me, Blake is a black string going, and very strong black string going from beginning to the end, and Miesel is a kind of white thread going all around like this. This is the second idea, which is using the threads as a link to the fiction. And of course, as I wanted the fiction to be as strong as possible, sometimes I had to destroy the beautiful idea of these strings to, according to the Klinemen, to make the reading easier. For example, I wanted to have in the first chapter only one chapter about the plane, and I divided in two because it was so much more interesting to have two chapters instead of one. Yeah. The third decision I had taken is what we call intertextuality. It's having inside the book references to other books, my books, books of friends, books of writers I liked, Romain Gary, Nietzsche, Kafka, Tolstoy. And for example, all quiet flights look alike. Every turbulent flight is different from what
turbulent in its own way. Yeah.
This is of course the beginning of Anna Karenina of Tolstoy, and there's many like this. Altogether, there's 91 little moves from quotes, and sometimes they are not visible at all. Like the beginning of a sentence of Sénèque, which says, Sénèque says, tired people are quarreling. And I added the sentence, exhausted people are much less quarreling. So the general idea was improving Nietzsche. It's possible to improve Nietzsche. And so the general idea was to have this intertextuality, which is fit inside, like, you know, I don't know if you use garlic a lot in America, but it's garlic inside the gigot, you know, inside. Plus, I had this general idea of beginning many chapters, in fact, 12 of them, by a distortion of another chapter of a book I like, or a book I don't especially like, but which was in my library. And for example, the beginning of one chapter, which is called Portrait de Victor Miesel en revenant, portrait of Victor Miesel as a ghost, as a, not revenant, coming back, revenant. is exactly a decalque. How would you say decalque?
We say calc in English also, but sort of like a tracing
It's a
over.
calque, but it's a decalque, which means it's not exactly copied. It's moved a bit from the beginning of the book of Romain Gary, which is called La Promesse de l'Aube. So in French, for example, my chapter begins by C'est ici, and the beginning of the chapter of Romain Gary begins by C'est fini. And all the chapter is moved, and all the, not the chapter, but all the first paragraph is moved from one place to another one. I used a cliff where he used the beach. I used seagulls where he uses the fuck. How do you say fuck?
Seals.
Seals. So all is moved like this, and there's no way to see it. No way. It's just for me, and it's a way of beginning a chapter in a certain way, which gives the first impulse. First impulse in the direction that you don't, a priori, you wouldn't have thought about giving this impulse. So it's interesting because it leads you somewhere else that the first draft would have led you to, and this has been used in 12 chapters. And there is plus another blueprint, which is not going to be revealed because it's not very useful. It's just for me.
Well, that's in a way, that's sort of how you know a book is Oulipian in some way or another, is that there's a whole cahier des charges, there's a whole sort of set of instructions or steps that were followed that as the reader, as the end user, so to speak, doesn't ever see. It's sort of the scaffolding that comes off before the thing goes public.
Exactly. And we have this general idea at Oulipo, which is a quote from Raymond Queneau, that a book is like an onion. And in an onion, you can see, before you open it, you can see the first layer of the onion, and there's a second layer of the onion, and the third layer of the onion. And you can go to the end of it, and there is a very, very small thing, which is the center of the onion. I like the idea that the anomaly can be read by people who see only the first layer of the onion. I don't see the others. It's not important at all. I mean, I don't think that intertextuality is meant to drive you out of the book. It's a funny thing if someone who knows the sentence of Tolstoy recognizes it, but if he does not, it doesn't stop him. There is also a sentence which is taken from Aurélien, which is the first time that Aurélien vit Bénédicte, the first time that Aurélien saw Bénédicte, he found she was not very pretty. And I use it exactly in the same way, but I just change the first names.
The characters' names, yeah.
Characters' names, because it's fun for everybody in France because everybody notices it, but it doesn't matter at all if you don't recognize it. And in fact, it's such an easy sentence. I mean, why try to make better than this sentence? The first time you meet someone that you are going to fall in love forever, sometimes you don't think she's pretty or he's pretty. And after that, everything changes because you know her or you know him. So why try to change this sentence, which is so obvious and so known? So I like this idea. And we all live in a cultural world where things sometimes escapes to us. We don't even know that we have used this sentence. It's coming from deep inside, and we have forgotten that we are taking from Nietzsche. At a certain moment, we say, it's Nietzsche. I know it's Nietzsche. And you try to find where it comes from. They say, yeah, it's close from Nietzsche. It's not exactly Nietzsche, but it's close from Nietzsche.
You can invoke the fair use doctrine.
Yeah, well, so many things have already been said. It's just plagiarism by anticipation.
That is what we say in the Oulipo when there's somebody who is doing Oulipian work before the Oulipo existed. We call it plagiarism by anticipation. And for those of you who were wondering, there's this notion of the clinomen that Hervé alluded to, which is a concept that basically describes when you have a set of rules to follow, and there's a way that you could follow the rule, but you choose not to for artistic effect.
Exactly, and you choose not to for the benefit of the reader.
Correct.
And not because it's too difficult for you to choose to follow them. It's the general idea is that, okay, the rule can be followed, but what if it's bad for for fiction? What if it slows it? And I decided that nothing would slow the fiction.
It's a very humanistic sort of counterbalance to this idea of using constraints and systems to govern the creation. You're basically reasserting yourself as the human and says, I know what a human is going to want to read, and I think it'll flow better if I break this chapter up into two, or if I do this other thing instead of where I'm supposed to.
And if you look at the book, for example, the first part of the book, it's modular, except for the two places of the plane, which are ones where chronological, you cannot have the second one before the first one. But outside of that, there's this theory of the beginnings, which is very important in literature, because the first chapter gives the color. And of course, you could begin the first part of the book with each of the chapters of the first part. But I decided to have a certain order, and this order was thought to organize the book, first beginning with black, then beginning with blue, then beginning with red. And the colors I had chosen, I was not going to follow them in the order of the arc-en-ciel of
the rainbow.
The rainbow. I decided to follow them in the interest of the reader. So, and I wanted to present Miesel as soon as possible. This was necessary because he's going to be a very important part after that. But after presenting Miesel, I forget about him, and then I come back to him afterwards.
Yep. Because then you don't make it. He's not first, so you don't make it his book completely. You have Blake who comes first and is this mysterious character who draws you in this noir kind of way, and then you have Miesel who's in this second position, and then it just goes on from there.
Exactly.
To excellent effect. One more question from the audience, and I will remind everyone you can buy Hervé's book. The links are in the chat. And if anyone has any last questions, put them in the chat now. Susan wants to know that you mentioned Italo Calvino with admiration, and you've talked about Romain Gary, you've talked about Nietzsche and Kafka. Who are some other writers that merit your admiration? Or sorry, adoration.
My adoration goes to, as you said, really Calvino, really Gary, really Kafka. I have a very strong admiration for Queneau as a poet. I think he's one of the most marvelous French poets. But my pantheon goes also to other non-French writers. I love Tolstoy, really. All my youth, I read Tolstoy, I read Faulkner, and I really like Richard Ford and Philip Roth to speak about American literature. And of course, Brautigan, which for me, he wrote the most beautiful haiku of the world, which is called this haiku suicide haiku. You know, it's I think I remember it. It's a slice of cucumber falls from the salad bowl. Who cares? I think it's life. I mean, it's a definition of life and of our lives. I mean, we are slices of cucumber, and we fall from a salad. Yeah.
What about people in terms of the influences on the Anomaly? What about people who weren't writers? Are there film directors, for instance, whose work was very important for you, or philosophers? I know Nick Bostrom was a big big figure.
The Anomaly is also as is pop culture. There's a lot of movies inside. There's, to say the truth, there's three main characters, main subjects which come from the films. One, of course, is Steven Spielberg with Close Encounters of the Third Time, where I make fun of it because of
there's a questionnaire that the people landing on.
I like this film because there's Truffaut inside, and I'm a great fan of Truffaut, and it's Truffaut who's asking the questions. The other filmmaker, of course, is Stanley Kubrick with Dr. Strangelove, and which is one of the most funny film of Stanley Kubrick. And of course, I'm coming back to Truffaut again. There's many scenes inside this book which remind me of Truffaut, especially the scenes in France. They come from, for example, a film which is called La Nuit Américaine, the American Night. So I am, like many writers, built of images which come from movies. But at the same time, I have this idea, which I don't think is wrong, is that most of the writers, even before the movies, were thinking movies without knowing that movies will exist one day. I think that if you think about the scene where Emma Bovary goes inside Rodolphe le fiacre, how say fiacre?
The carriage.
Yeah, well, when she goes inside his car, and there's about one page about not knowing what is happening in the. It's a film, and even in Victor Hugo, most of his Les Misérables, there's many scenes which are really films, like chant, contre-chant, traveling, zoom, and you can see it when you see this certain amount of pages of Les Misérables. So I think all literature is an attempt to transform images into words, and sometimes it's even more efficient than in films, because it gives to the reader a much larger possibility of imagining what is the characters. And I was playing with this in the Anomaly with the character of Adrian, because Adrian is always changing face. He's never the same. It's impossible to know what he looks like.
There's a running gag where all the people who meet him thinks he looks like a slightly balding version of a different American movie star.
Yeah, he looks like Tom Hanks. He looked like he doesn't see. He always keeps changing face for someone else. So maybe even for the simulation, Adrian is fun. I mean, they're making fun of him, not being able to know what he looks like really for others. And I love this idea, because we never know what we look like for others, even if we look inside mirrors. It doesn't show that if we're in a simulation, maybe the mirror sends you an image, which is not the image that you send to the others, which would be fun.
Yeah.
Maybe.
All right. One last question, again from Amanda, who wants to know if you have a favorite episode of Star Trek.
I'm not very good in Star Trek, but I have one favorite episode. It's the film in which Cumberbatch plays. I don't know the one, but Cumberbatch is a wonderful actor.
Oh, I'm bad at Star Trek also, but
yeah. Well, anyway, there's one in which Cumberbatch plays the bad guy, and I love Cumberbatch. So every time he plays somewhere, I look for film.
Let's see which Benedict Cumberbatch movie we're talking about here.
Star Trek, Cumberbatch.
That would be the simplest way to find it, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Just because this discussion has been so riveting, I thought we would let people cool down with just watching me Google something. Star Trek Into Darkness.
Into Darkness. That's right.
So there you have it, Amanda. Well, thank you so much, Hervé. This has been wonderful and illuminating. And please run, don't walk to buy your copy of The Anomaly in Adriana Hunter's translation, available now from Other Press. Peter, if you have any words to close us out?
Yeah, I feel like I've had a huge meal. I mean, this has been such a rich, a wide-ranging, and very delightful discussion that is just
like a masterclass.
So much ground. I've been pulling quotes from both of you today. It's really been so much fun and food for thought, and also an inspiration to go back and read a lot of the literature that you both mentioned. So thank you, Hervé. You've been so generous, and it was really a delight. It's an honor to have you grace our virtual halls.
This would be a good bumper sticker. It's possible to improve Nietzsche.
Yes. City Lights will make a sticker that says it is possible to improve Nietzsche.
Human to human. That's my.
Yes. Well, Daniel, thank you for doing the honors. And actually, we
My
look forward
pleasure.
to seeing you again soon for Eduardo, I should say, Eduardo Berte's event on Monday.
That's
December
right. I
13th.
cordially invite everyone back Monday the 13th, when I'll be in conversation with Eduardo Berti, another member of the Ulipo, whom we talked about briefly, to talk about his book, An Ideal Presence, which I have right here.
And you'll actually have more coming up too. So you're publishing another book as well this year, right?
I am publishing a book next year with mine truly, with City Lights. So we'll be doing an event about that in February. I've already forgotten what date.
Yeah, but I'm thinking Fern has another book as well, right?
True, yeah, Fern also. So Fern is my publisher, which An Ideal Presence by Eduardo Berti is our first book, and our second book will be out in June.
Great.
So more on that as information becomes shareable.
Well, we look forward to that. Thank you both once again, everybody. We posted
Thank
links
you so much.
with which you may buy the books.
I love the idea that the Fern books of Daniel. Fern means, of course, fern in English, but in German, I told him it means far away. And I think it's so interesting.
It's a good name for a press that was started during COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We thought remote books wouldn't be as fun, you know.
True. I love it. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your generosity.
Thanks to everybody for coming.
An honor. And thank you everyone in the audience. Thank you, Hervé.
Daniel. You've done valiant work.
Looking
Salut
forward.
Daniel. À bientôt.
Salut.
À bientôt. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.